Welcome to another episode of Chax Chat. Join Chad Chilius and me, Dax Castro, where each week we wax poetic about document accessibility topics, tips, and the struggle of remediation and compliance. So sit back, grab your favorite mug of whatever, and let's get started.
Welcome, everybody. I want to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Chad Chilius. I'm an Adobe certified expert and an accessibility wizard here at Chax Training and Consulting.
And my name is Dax Castro. I am the other accessibility wizard here at Chax Training and Consulting. And to be fair, we've got quite a few other people with lots of varied knowledge at working at Chax. But Chad and I have been deemed the wizards, and so we own it and wear it proudly. And if you would like your certification, we're both certified as accessible document specialists by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And if you'd like your certification, and you've been doing this a couple years because you have to have some job experience to go take the test, head on over to accessibilityassociation.org and click on certifications to get more information from the IAAP about the ADS. How's it going, Chad?
Going well.
Awesome. How's the garden going?
The garlic is doing great, but that's the only thing we have in the garden right now. It's still still too cold. What did my wife say? Usually Mother's Day. Okay. I think in the Northeast, right? Mother's Day is like the official no more frost date, you know. So we're actively looking at seed catalogs and picking out what we're going to put in the garden this year. So looking forward to warmer weather.
All of our garden is sprouting. Everything is now at least an inch or two seedlings. Many of them are much higher than that. Our peas are about 6 or 8 inches, and the garlic is just going swimmingly. And I've got an entire bed of a bunch of different kinds of beets. So I'm so excited about that. And yeah, lots of good stuff. I guess California is zone 9. We get a lot sooner planting.
Well, and I just wanted to give our audience, in case like people are tuning in for the first time or they're not familiar with us, right? Dax is out in Sacramento, California, and I'm out here in, outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So we're kind of like complete opposite from a climate standpoint. But it's always fun to hear like what each one is doing at different times of the year, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, today I wanted to talk about an important topic. We're going to get right to it. It's going to be a shorter podcast today because I think the topic is just one that we can cover fairly quickly, but it's an important one. And the topic is bullets and the formatting of bullets, because you and I both know that based on the program you use, and the method you export even, you're going to get different bullet structure. And some people have asked, why does that matter? What's the difference? Should I care? Should I be looking at it? And so today we're going to unpack that a bit. And I think we should start, Chad, with just talking about what a basic list structure is from a tags perspective and what the different parts and pieces are. So why don't you start us off there?
Well, and before we dive into deep, Dax, I think it's worth us mentioning too. I know you brought up bullets, right? But I think it's worth mentioning that numbers are tagged exactly the same way, right? At least in a PDF file, right?
Mostly the same way, because there is a list type that is often annotated inside a PDF. Most people never get this far, but there is a disk, a number, an ordered list, an unordered list. There's a list type that I think Common Look sets, and I think PDFix sets as well, that actually defines what type of list it is. But that's a hidden thing. It's not really a tag. It's an actual property. So you shouldn't really worry yourself too much about that.
No. And I mean, unlike HTML, which specifically has an ordered list and an unordered list and a definition list,
right?
The PDF format does not have that. They're more pretty much generic. Like for at a glance, they're both going to be structured the same.
Right.
So,
agreed.
So to your question, to answer your question, how are list items structured? Right.
Yes.
So the overall container of a list is the list tag, and the list tag is just a capital L, right? So when you have a tag that's just a capital L, that means it's a list, right? And that's like the parent tag of everything in the list, right?
Right.
And then as you dive a little bit deeper, what you'll find is that the bullet or the number will be tagged as a label tag, right? And that's capital L, lowercase b, lowercase l.
But inside the list tag, we've got the LI tag for list item.
Dax. You're right. I'm doing.
I know everybody listening to this podcast was about to have a heart attack. They were probably yelling at their radio or their phone right now. They were like, "What?"
I was about to get a whole bunch of like scathing emails from our audience, right? I'm doing this in my head. I'm not looking at a file right now, and so I'm trying to like walk through it in my head. So you're absolutely right. I'm so sorry. Main tag is a list. Then the only thing that can be a child of the list tag is a list item tag.
Right.
And that's a capital L, capital I, right? And each item of the list is its own list item tag, right?
Right.
Then within each list item, the bullet and or the number will be tagged as a label. Again, capital L, lowercase b, lowercase l. That is the label tag. And it's worth noting that using assistive technology, whatever character that is will be voiced, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit later, right, Dax? Yep. Talk about like the nuances of that. So the bullet and or the number will be tagged as a label, and then the text of the bullet, right, will be tagged as, it's called a list item body tag. The exact name of the tag is capital L, capital B, lowercase o, lowercase d, lowercase y, right? So L body. And case sensitivity matters, guys, right? Like if you've ever done that by accident, right, where you make an H1 a lowercase h and a number 1, you'll find that you'll probably get an error. So yeah, like that's the main structure of a list, the fundamental structure of a list.
Well, and then when you have let's talk about that. So when the reason lists matter in the first place is that NVDA and JAWS will look for that list and then give the user an approximation of how many items are in the list. So it counts how many LI tags there are and at what level. If you're using JAWS, NVDA has no longer says list level 1 or 2, but JAWS says list item or list level nesting level 1, right?
Well, like when you get to a list, and I wanted to ask you, like you said, it'll give you an approximation.
Well, it gives you the number. It counts. It's not approximate.
Yeah, when you encounter a list, both JAWS and NVDA will say list with X number of items, right? So if you've got 10 items, it'll say list with 10 items. If you have, we talked about this before, like one of my clients, they like to put in the back of their document a list of all the zip codes that they service.
Right.
And it's like 200 zip codes, right? So I kind of fake it and format them as a list, so that when they get to it, it'll say list with 200 items, right? And then if the user chooses to navigate those 200 items, cool. But if not, they could say, nah, let's move on. Let's move on to the next item. So yeah, it'll announce to you how many items are in that list.
So the main point of the list, the benefit is that InDesign, the way InDesign and Word export their PDFs with the nested listing levels lets the user know that when JAWS or NVDA gets to those, when JAWS gets to those list items, it's going to hear nesting level 1 or nesting level 2 as you get into those nesting levels within the list. So it's a great way for a user to kind of understand the list structure. Now, there are some caveats to how the different programs export, because if you're using Word and you use the Acrobat exporter to export, you're going to get a bunch of LIs, and instead of getting an LBL for the label where the bullet or the number can sit, you just get an L body. And some people might ask, well, why does that matter? Well, it matters because NVDA and JAWS will not pause when they're reading that list level or that list to give you one item. It just goes. It literally will just read everything in sequence without stopping, without pausing, without anything. And that's because it's looking for the L body or the LBL and the L body. And when it's not there, it just reads it.
It's interesting that both screen readers are looking for that label as like the start and or end of the previous item. Right?
Yeah.
And you and I tested this one time and we read the list and it just read them like it just never stopped. It just, it's
Right.
going to read all of them. And so I guess in a way, like it kind of violates influent relationships because they don't know that they're individual items. It just sounds like one big cohesive mass of elements.
Well, I mean, you could hear bullet, whatever, but I think it interrupts the user experience because you're like, well, wait a minute. I was just able to kind of navigate through and now all of a sudden I can't pause it because the moment you stop it to try to go backward and then it'll go backward, but then it'll start reading again. It just keeps, it's like it's in permanent forward mode. And so, because some people might ask, well, why does it matter whether I have the LBL or the L body? I will say that if you just have the LI, only the LI tag, that is the simplest form of a list. I'm not sure actually if that still causes the same problem, but we know that LI is the most basic form of a list with no L body, just the LI.
Well, and to the standard, it's acceptable, right? Like technically all you need is an LI and it makes that, it says it's acceptable, right?
Well, unless you're using the pack checker, because the pack checker will actually flag it and say formal, it's the warning that says formal.
It's the quality tab, right? You're talking about the quality. Yeah.
Formal correctness of a list tag.
Right.
And so the big question here is, should I go in and fix my bullets if they don't come out L, LI, LBL, L body? And the answer is, if you want the user to be able to stop and pause in between each of the different bullets as they move through the list in a normal, regular, repeatable way, yes. Currently, Word does export now. We did some tests where the LBL is separate from the L body. And that's nice because it used to not be that case. It used to just be in the LI, right?
And this is what's getting tricky with Microsoft. I mean, I love what they're doing, right? I'm not complaining, guys. So Clint, if you're listening, right, like I'm not complaining in any way, shape, or form. I think what's getting tricky for us, Dax, is staying on top of these improvements because like we only discover them, at least for me, like I discover them by accident. And like I said, we tested it today. I was expecting it to output the lists without the label tag. And I opened it up and I'm like, there they are, right? Like all of a sudden they're there,
Well, it's funny you should say that because just a few weeks ago, we were at CSUN Assistive Technology Conference and I sat down with Clint and Ilva and their team to talk about some of these improvements and to talk about some exciting new improvements that are coming for Word and PowerPoint, some of which we were working out. Can't really tell you what they are, but I'm so excited. Maybe something around tables. We'll see how that goes. But they asked me if I asked them that very question. Hey, is there a way that we could sit down and go over what all the new advancements for Word and PowerPoint for accessibility are? And they said yes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down with them, do a formal interview. I'm going to put together a blog. And actually, it might even end up being, I'll be guest blogger on Microsoft's website on their blog to talk about all the different accessibility improvements that they've done over the last probably 2 years. And then we're going to create a handout with all of those improvements and offer it to our podcast listeners. So super excited about that. Look for that in coming weeks. So
yeah,
stuff.
Yeah, that'll be great to have, right? Because like I said, a lot of these things, and again, part of it's the way Microsoft rolls out the updates. Because I think they do it in like waves. And I don't understand like how different people get on different waves or whatever. But like you had mentioned to me a while back, how Word has improved the alt text in their app. And I was testing it and I'm like, Dax, it's still as lousy as it's ever been. Mm-hmm. And only in the last couple of weeks, I tested it again. And now all of a sudden I'm getting like really robust alt text. Sure. And I think it's because that wave came through and I got the update and now, I benefit from it. So that's another great question, Dax. Like when you're with them, like maybe find out like what their mechanism is for how those rollouts get pushed.
Yeah. So going back, the LI, the L is your list tag, the LI is your list item. Then inside that, you're going to have, inside the L, you might have 15 LI tags, right? And then each one of those LIs contain an LBL and an L body. But when you have a second list, a sub list of your list items, again, this is where different programs will export differently. The L, it creates a new list tag. It's supposed to go inside the L body tag. That's where technically that L lives. The second L goes inside the L body. However, Word will do that. InDesign will just put it outside where the L body tag is. It won't actually put it inside the L body. But we tested it, and it doesn't really have an impact on the user experience. So while not technically correct, it's not creating a barrier for people using assistive technology.
Now, maybe it would be worth talking about Dax, right? So like let's say you output a PDF and your list is not correct, right? Regardless of what program you use, what are our options for fixing it?
Well, I think that if you're using, a lot of different programs that are specifically for remediation do work pretty well together. I don't think there's any one tool that I would say is better than another. To be honest, if I've got a auto tag actually works really well for list items inside Acrobat, just generically. But if I've already got a tag document, I'm kind of screwed. Yeah. I can't just tell it auto tag this part. And you and I have mentioned this a couple of times, right?
Yeah, like this is where selective auto tag would be amazing, right? Like if I could just either marquee or just select the text and say auto tag this selection, that would be pretty cool. So like if you wanted to use auto tag in Acrobat right now, you would almost have to extract those pages, auto tag that separate file, and then merge them back in. Is not fun.
I wouldn't recommend. Yeah. Well, and the thing is that the reading order tool is really an auto tag. It's what we're asking for. But what's missing from the auto tag of, hey, can I select a thing and change it to a tag or insert that tag? Well, that's what the reading order tool does, right? The Chax Chat reading order tool. However, list is not one of those tools. One of the most useful parts of tagging is to be able to tag a list. So the other tools that we use, Common Look does it really well. PDFix does it really well.
PDFix does it really well.
Yeah. I find that Common Look, it will get it, but if the spacing, the leading in between the paragraphs isn't consistent, sometimes it won't get each one. So what I'll do is I'll just tag the LIs. I'll go LI, 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 and then go back in and wrap the whole thing in a list tag. And then I've got to break out the LBLs, kind of do it a little bit piecemeal. But I can do it relatively quickly using the shortcut keys that are inside Common Look. So, and rightly so, they're not alone. Acrobat does the same thing. It doesn't always get all the list items correct. I don't know much about PDFix's capability of how often it incorrectly tags a list, but they can be a little tricky.
I think it's really similar. And I mean, like the problem we're talking about is really a poor design problem, right? Like they didn't design it well enough to make it clear, right? So, because even to a sighted user, when you've got like that big leading within a bullet, you're like, is that part of the bullet, or is it a separate paragraph? You know, it's kind of weird. But yeah, PDFix has the shortcuts too. Option L will tag content as a list, very similar to Common Look. And I actually used this. You and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but InDesign improperly outputs endnotes currently.
Sure.
And so one of the ways that I address that problem is I tag the endnotes as a list.
Mm-hmm.
And so the label gets tagged correctly.
Sure.
And then I just level up the L body, and then I rename the list item to a note tag. And then
awesome. For everyone whose head is spinning already.
I know, I'm sorry.
I'm already spinning as well. So we are at we only have a few more minutes left. So I want to cover just a couple more things. First of all, Chad, you mentioned this earlier. The bullet icon that you use for your bullets does matter. They do get voiced. So when you use the hollow bullet, the default second level bullet in Word, it literally is the letter O. We've asked Microsoft to change it. I would think it's a fairly simple change, but it's maybe not so high on the priority list currently. Microsoft, if you're listening, please go fix this. But it will say, oh, testing soil pH. Oh, adding compost. Oh, improving drainage, right? Those are not really, I mean, it's not supposed to say that. So,
well, and similarly, like when people try to get creative with their lists and they'll make the bullet a star or a box or a pointy finger, right? You know, whatever it might be.
Black right pointing pointer is the one I see a lot. Yeah.
If you're lucky, if you used an open type font, it'll likely say, you know, right pointing finger before every bulleted item. But if you use like wingdings or webdings, it'll likely say Q.
Right.
And then whatever the text of the bullet,
yep.
Q, right? And you're like, where did that come from? Well, in that font, that's the position they used for that character was the letter Q. And so it gets voiced as, you know, whatever that so it, again, you know, Dax, I mean, you have a better handle on this. I mean, I don't know that I'd call it a huge barrier, but certainly from a user experience standpoint, it's kind of like, what's going on here? Like what? And I think as you read through it, you start to recognize, oh, the letter R is representing the bullet. Okay, I get it. But initially you're like, why is it voicing random letters? You know, it's kind of awkward.
Well, and there's a fix for it. You can go into Acrobat and use a pre-flight fix-up to change all your bullets to voice as standard bullets, but there's a bug. And the bug is that if you have any, remember we started out by saying a list can be a numbered list or a bulleted list. Acrobat's fixes your numbered lists too, and doesn't separate between a bullet list and a numbered list. So what I would do is if I've got a document and there's only a couple numbered lists, I'll go change those L tags to L num, and that's not a standard tag. I just add something else to it so that when I run the fix up, it ignores those L tags and only targets my bullets. But it doesn't always work, and it's a pain in the butt, and you've got to know where those numbered lists are. And if you miss one, it's just gonna, you know, it can be problematic. So definitely not a great solution. Alternatively, tools like Common Look, you can search for an instance of a certain thing and set the actual text for that to say bullet, which is in essence what the pre-flight fix-up is doing as well. So.
Well, and, you know, just to add on to what you just said, so like that fix up, what it does is it adds, I think, actual text to the label tag.
Yes, it actually puts the bullet character, the actual black normal bullet into the actual text field.
And so another place where you'll see the label tag sometimes is when you have footnote references.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like that reference can also be a label tag. And one of the complaints I often hear from people, and you and I have talked about this on the podcast before, Dax, where like if you have a footnote reference that is positioned after another number, it'll actually voice it as part of like the, you know, like let's say your sentence ends in 2026.
Right.
And then footnote reference 1, it'll voice it as 20,200. 261. Now I tested that recently and it did not voice it as a big number, right? But what you'll hear is 2026 1, right? And I've heard a lot of people complain about that, and rightly so, I think. And so a similar solution, right, on that footnote reference, in the actual text field, you can put the text that says footnote reference 1.
Right.
And it's a much better experience. If you've got a lot of footnotes, it's a huge pain, right? Like I wouldn't want to have to do that, but it does create a much better experience.
Maybe we can come up with a plugin for Acrobat or a script for Acrobat that we could write that could add the word footnote for any label.
Any reference.
Any reference.
Yeah, either a label or a reference. Yeah.
We'll have to get Brian on that. So
Brian, awesome. Yep.
Well, we are at time, guys. I would love to stay and chat with you more about this, Chad. Maybe we'll bring this up again on a future podcast, but we are out of time for today. Thank you guys so much. Hopefully this has given you some insight. If you want to know how those bullets sound, go onto Google and just Google, how does my bullet sound, Chax? And even if you don't add the word Chax at the end, I'm pretty sure our article on how bullets voice comes up on the search engine pretty high.
Yeah.
And you can go download a PDF that has a list of how most of the bullets sound using JAWS or NVDA.
Yeah, it's great article.
Awesome.
All right, guys. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. My name is Chad Chilius.
And my name is Dax Castro, where every other week we unravel accessibility for you.
Thanks, guys.